Bill Wilson had a great line when he talked about emotional sobriety, having relationships appropriate to that relationship. How do we discriminate or differentiate what's the best way to deal with the situation we're in? And look, sometimes you don't know. Sometimes it's a matter of trial and error. Let me try this, see what happens. Let me take in the feedback. Let me pay attention to what's going on. Am I alienating someone, or am I getting more of a connection with them? Because deep down inside, like I said, if the best of us is in charge, we're trying to find a way to stay connected and not get disconnected during trouble.
Welcome to Emotional Sobriety. We have Joe C. on the podcast, his first appearance in 2023, and hopefully not the last. He's one of my favorite guests.
Amazing. Hear that, all the other guests?
How's it going, Joe?
Well, I don't sound emotionally sober so far. So, we got to start
That's
somewhere.
the next show, Joe. Joe had this great idea for the next show. We're going to have a whole show on emotional inebriety. And we're going to show you guys the other side of our personas, right? There we go.
Exactly. That's right.
Well, listen, you had a great idea for today's show. Why don't you share everybody what your thoughts are about that, Joe?
Against emotional sobriety is this need sometimes I have. Let me just personalize it instead of finger point, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's
for the next show, Joe. We'll do the finger pointing in the next show.
Okay, exactly.
Well, listen, let me also say, given the subject he's getting ready to bring up, if you need somebody else to point a finger out, I think it's pretty safe for you to point in my direction. Feel free.
We should have another meeting on codependency and emotional sobriety too.
If you want to, if that's what you want, we will. Yeah,
of course. But the whole idea that there is a tendency. I can either build myself up if I'm not feeling good, or put somebody else down.
Yeah.
And righteous indignation, not only is it a way to get the dopamine going and feeling outraged and how dare they, and did you see what they did, and just feeling morally superior to them. I don't even have to consider my side of the street right now, because look at them. And not only do I have a tendency to do this, or anyone has a tendency to do this, it's baked into the way they deliver news now, right? Did you see what the other side did? Whether you're liberal or conservative, you're getting fed these ideas of, we're righteous, they're deluded, they're difficult, they are dangerous, and they must be stopped now. It becomes a consumer product based on hijacking our sort of emotions. And this can happen in a meeting, right? So-and-so put their hand up. And already it starts going, right? Instead of bringing a beginner's mind to let's see what they have to say today. Who knows what growth and new virtue they might be bringing to this meeting. But this is something that is difficult to deal with personally. And in dealing with others, how do we set a boundary between, there's nothing to work with here? Because some people you can reach, they just need a little bit of attention. And as a member of, a late member of my group often used to say, who grew up in rural Ontario, Canada, don't wrestle with pigs. One, you can't win. Two, you're going to get dirty. Three, the pigs love it. Right. Perfect. So sometimes you just have to, sort of not engage. Right. So I thought that'd be an interesting topic today. I'm sure we all have stories of how we saw ourselves slipping and had to do a little review of our own emotional sobriety and particular characters in our world where we see they're just so, tied into this. And the thing is, when I get a dopamine rush, whether the other political party is, look at the outrageous thing they're doing, there's a huge down, right? And the up it's like drugs. The up gets smaller and the down gets deeper, right? So, it just becomes an unwinnable scenario to sort of go there for my feel good, right? Because it ain't gonna last.
That's one of the things on the checklist there that tells us that that it either is, there's a way of defining it that way, or it is certainly analogous to addiction, is the fact that it follows the checklist of addiction symptoms. And I love how you started with the the national or the global picture, and we also go bring it back all the way to our personal relationships, like in meetings or in marriages. By the way, we do that. It's like, because one of the things that I believe, as far as pardon my I'm allowing my hippie self to speak now, is in terms of contributing to healing in the world, is and emotional sobriety basically is that it's always, you work always from the inside out. I mean, in that way, we're not the only system of thinking that thinks that way, but it's like any wisdom says that. But if we're getting, when I'm getting hooked into the news the way you're talking about, Joe, what that means is where I need to start is my righteous indignation then can shift. This is very clever of my saboteur in my head, and now I'm really upset with the media. See, the media is all, there goes the media again. It's like, we're not saying, I'm always telling clients, I'm not saying these other things aren't happening, but if you want to actually make a change that matters, you got to look at yourself first. And in this case, it's like, how am I doing this internally? And that's where I love the idea that you go back to trying to make a decision, first of all, whether or not to engage.
Right.
I was really pro Bernie movement in 2020, and there was a lot of and this came about during the time of COVID and during the time of Trump's shenanigans and George Floyd, and it was just a very brutal period of time when just a lot of like these issues had been percolating in the country for a very long time came to the surface, and there was the briefest glimmer of systemic address to these things, and there wasn't. And I was left with all this anger and negativity, and I felt a lot of people in my generation had fair criticism of the status quo. Not a lot to do some days, but just post about it and just be pissed off. And I started by mentioning recovery because, well, there's people I could call, there's meetings I could go to, there's others suffering in a very observable way that are in my kind of like circle of people, or there's circles within circles. And when so oftentimes I have a choice between the Maddiction of that which I can't change in our politics, or getting connected to someone, helping out who's suffering from from the same addiction issues that I suffer from, and that's been my a little bit of a saving grace, I guess, through all this. But certainly like the powerlessness in the face of this grinding machine, is something that I only know how to answer with anger, I think, in a lot of ways. And that's my entry point to all this, I guess I'll say.
Well,
Nice.
there's another dimension to this that I want to get into, because it's interesting, Joe. On Thursday nights, we've just started the exploration of step number 6. Like, we're entirely ready to have all these entirely ready to have God remove all these defects of character, right? And so we've started a discussion of that, and we're going to be going on for the next several weeks. But I just want to point out one part of the 12 and 12 where Bill addresses this, because see, it's really important for us to understand that behavior like this is functional. Like you said, we get something out of it. I mean, there was a whole movement in psychotherapy for a while that was what is that doing for you? Right? That was the question the therapist would ask the client. So if they were angry, what are you getting out of that? What is that doing for you?
Exactly.
What's the benefit of that behavior? What does that behavior do to me? That's when Gestalt therapists would use it. They would ask the client to say, what is you getting out of it? And what are you doing to me when you act like that way? Because what you're doing to me is a part of the function, right? I'm putting you down. I'm making myself bigger than you, or better than you, or smarter than you, or wiser than you, or whatever it is. But let me read a few lines from the 12 and 12, because he addresses this very well. So here are the lines, and then I want to say something else about the function of this stuff. So he goes, this is on page 66 in step number 6. What we must recognize now is that we exult in some of our defects. We love them. He goes, we love them. Who, for example, doesn't like to feel just a little superior to the next fellow, or even quite a lot superior? He goes, self-righteous anger also can be very enjoyable. In a perverse way, we actually take satisfaction from the fact that many people annoy us. Many people annoy us, for it brings a comfortable feeling of superiority. Gossip, barbed with our anger, a polite form of murder by character assassination. He doesn't pull any punches on that one, right?
Yeah, no way.
Murder by character assassination has its satisfactions for us too. Here, we are not trying to help those we criticize. We are trying to proclaim our own righteousness.
Yeah.
Wow. So he nails it, right? When he's talking about that, this is one of the things that if we're going to really take that inventory, in step 4 and 5, one of the things we're going to look at is how our emotional dependency, right? This need for me to feel okay based on the environmental support. So when we say environmental support, it means how I perceive the environment and what I do with the environment as well. So if I'm looking at my environment for all of the evidence on how messed up everybody is, and therefore how much better I am, see, that's a form of me trying to take care of myself, which is it's not a great way to do it, but that is the function, right?
It's self-soothing.
I'm trying to have some self-esteem. See, that's the way I think about it. This is an attempt for me to elevate myself at your expense, to elevate my self-esteem. Look,
well, let me say this: the nature of that energy that comes up is the energy is not bad. Even anger has a bad reputation. It's not when I love that Bill says self-righteous anger, because that's a particular that's a mental process, not an emotional process. So and taking what you're saying, going back to what the thing I went to with what Patrick shared is. That becomes that place, and I think this is so much on target for emotional sobriety, that when we have these energies that come up, rather than, of course, we have to deal with the whole the self-judgment, but we have a choice of what to do with that energy. And what and Patrick gave that, he basically says with recovery he can take that energy. He's watching himself, and I mean all of us have had experiences where you sit there and you're acting out in a way that is not healthy, but you don't feel like you can do something about it. You're just watching yourself fuck up. Tell me I'm not the only one who's had that experience.
No,
It's like, but the idea is when you come fully in charge, you take what that from what Bill W has written and what Bill Berger is saying, Alan. is
New
and
name.
You put it I love the I used to call these things like overly simplistic or offensively simplistic. It's like bring it down to a simple thing that helps us, something we can carry with us as a part of our practice, and it is whatever that energy is, rather than judge it, make choices about how you use it. And what Patrick was saying, like he learned, okay, well, I have this wonderful opportunity here with this program where, I mean, we can all look for places where we can be of use to people, but you're going, well, hell, I have this ready-made place where I can go, and there's always something I can do that's going to be helpful to somebody. But it's the main thing is the choice of what to do with the energy.
Yeah. Well, listen, to get there though, you've got to own it. See that? I think that's the point in this thing. You can't jump over that, in my opinion. You've got to say, look, I'm being self-righteous. I want to feel better than you. This is the only way I know how, or like in your example, Patrick, on how to not feel powerless or how not to feel helpless in the light of all this other stuff. I'll just judge the hell out of what the other side is doing. A great example was like the other day, President Biden gave his State of the Union address, right, to Congress, right? And Marjorie Greene, one of my favorite Republicans, was in the audience doing her thing, heckling him, on BS and this and that, right? And everybody, I mean, first of all, I think Biden handled her wonderfully. I mean, he didn't polarize with her. He kind of dealt with it and didn't get into that whole thing, which was really wise. But how many of us sat there and judged Marjorie Greene? And now turn the clock back a couple years ago. How many of us did that with Trump that were on the other side?
Exactly.
How many of us sat there and said, oh my God, BS. I mean, are you kidding me? He said that. I mean, it's so relative, isn't it? In terms of what your values are and what's going on. And so she, just like us, was doing what Tom said. She didn't know how to deal with the feelings she had. She didn't know how to express herself in a way that doesn't alienate. See, there's a couple things. What I was going to say before is I brought up the fact that when I was working with Dr. Kempler, he said all of our symptoms, character defects, adaptations, whatever you want to call them, character defaults. That's how we've been referring to them, Joe. Somebody in the group suggested
better word.
As character defaults. We just learned how to function this way as our best adaptation at the time, right?
Yeah.
And I like that. I think it's so much less judgmental than defect of character, right?
Well, that treats it like a cancer that has to be removed. And how can you remove half a coin?
Right.
Remove it. You're right. So here's the three things that Kempler said. So all symptoms do three things. First of all, they economize our distress. If I'm not feeling good about myself, if I'm feeling powerless, like Patrick was referring to a minute ago, if I become self-righteous, guess what I've just done? I've addressed my powerlessness by having power and judging the other person or the system or whatever I'm in relationship to. So that's number one. It economizes our distress. Number two, it tells us what's missing. I don't know how to feel good about myself in any other way. As Tom was saying, is that anger is not a bad thing if you use it for connection to enhance or enrich an encounter rather than get alienated from it. And see, that's one of the things I tell people is try to become aware, is what you're doing enhancing your encounter or is it diminishing it? Is it enhancing or diminishing it? So the second thing is it tells us what's missing. And the third thing is it tells us what's needed. It says, look, I need to find a way to feel okay about myself or to deal with my powerlessness in a way where I don't become righteous, where I keep this I to thou relationship. I keep connected during trouble. And see, this is the thing that is so hard, Joe, is how to stay connected when there's tension and trouble in a relationship rather than get alienated and disrupt the connection. And if you want to disrupt it, self-righteousness will do it every time.
It's the ultimate, narcissism of small differences. Right. Like both parties love their country. Both parties want prosperity for all, right?
Yes.
But we get caught up in the small differences. There was an article by a psychologist named Jeremy Sherman in Psychology Today. He does this whole series on, you'll love this, Tom, jerkology. Because you love to make up words.
That's
and
good.
Maddiction is one of his words. And one of the things he cautions against is being furious is the most effective vaccination against being curious.
Oh, I love things that rhyme also. My God,
Yeah.
that has everything. Say it again.
Yeah, being furious is the most effective vaccination against being curious.
I love it. That's a good one.
Wow.
Is there always anger underneath fear?
No, there's always fear underneath
Fear
anger.
underneath anger. That's what I meant. Sorry.
Mhm, mhm.
Yes.
Yeah, I think so.
It like Ernest Becker, sort of brought everything down to, existential threats, right? Like the zero-sum game, right? Like if you win, then I lose type of thing, right? So it's a matter of survival. Because when I feel weak, if I criticize you, I'm purified.
Yes.
Right. I'd just like to say one other thing to bolster my point from earlier is I think one thing the recovery community, it's a form of collective action, which we don't get a lot of, or we don't participate in very much in the context of politics in America. And we don't think of it that way because it's an apolitical space. But it truly is like, a bunch of heads put together and energy going outwards. There's a self improvement component to it, of course, but in many concepts of recovery have to do with, just feeding the group.
That's such a good point. I mean, that's such a good point, Patrick. And the thing I thought about with that, because of course, one of the things about AA is, I mean, it is a miracle, a sociological miracle that this thing works. And it's like, I mean, maybe there are others, but I don't know of any other, by definition, leaderless groups that function the way this does. And not only that, when you say many heads come together, we're talking about many heads that are fucking crazy. By definition, we're nuts when we get there. It's like these are not necessarily maybe some of the sharpest people I've ever met, for sure, but not necessarily the most sane people. But as a community, it really does, because a lot of times when you bring, one of the things that happens, I would describe when people have horrible situations in corporations and in jobs in bigger companies. It's like, well, you bring a bunch of dysfunctional people together, and what you're going to have is a dysfunctional environment. But it's like, and when we all know there's lots of dysfunction inside AA, but it's like the idea that the program itself works, and it works as, now, what did you call it in terms of action?
Oh, collective action.
Collective action. Beautiful. I appreciate you pointing that out. I like that.
But then, of course, I love what Allen says about it, which is, that's our best thinking brought us here. Well, yeah, it's like the healthy part of us is what brings us together to address these things.
Well, one of the things I want to also say too, because we're using some examples that are big, obvious examples. One of the part of emotional sobriety is also dealing with ourselves at a more subtle level, because things that we're not necessarily screaming out about or posting something about, or sometimes not even speaking about, just when we're these days. I've been in this process long enough and wise enough to be able to even acknowledge my own judgments and righteous indignation and that kind of stuff internally. So I may not even I may be going through that. And nobody doesn't. I don't look any different. I look just as good as I ever did, and I look like I'm being sane, all that stuff. But my tendency is to not share that with anybody. And I think, we all have privacy and we don't have to share every damn thing that happens, but where there is a pattern of that, or of any of this stuff inside me, even at a very subtle level. It's one of the things I want to say I say it to myself, but for anybody else who needs to hear it, is don't wait for a big catastrophe to happen. This is the kind of stuff that you talk to a sponsor or a friend or a therapist, or, just, or your spouse about. Just, you're not even looking, it's not a problem to be solved. It's just what I call conversations to convey. I'm just telling you some information. I'm just giving you some information about what's going on with me.
Well, listen, it's a good point, Tom. I mean, this would be a good exercise for those of you that are listening. Get a little notebook, or a little spiral bound notebook or an index card, and carry it around with you during the course of the day. And every time you become aware that you're judging someone, put a little hash mark on it. Just become aware. Don't do anything. Don't try to change it. Just try to become aware of how many times you judge somebody during the course of a day. And then try, as you do that, once again, not trying to change it. The first step is always be aware of it. Be aware of what happens for you as you make that judgment. So 2 things: be aware of you making a judgment, and then what do you experience after you make the judgment? What's the immediate thing? It's funny, before you called it a dopamine rush, before we get on the show, Joe, is that there is a sense of somehow, what do we call it? Purging ourselves. Look, I'm not as bad as they are. My God, look at them. I mean, how can somebody behave like that? And I'll tell you, whenever you're making a judgment, and this is one of the things that Fritz Perls pointed out to us, is it's a projection. Is what you're seeing and what you're judging in that person is something that you've disowned in yourself, that you're not taking responsibility for.
Yeah. What's that saying? If you can see it,
you spot it, you got it.
Yeah. If you spot it, you got it. Yeah. One
I
finger is
that.
pointing out there. There's 3 more
pointing back at you. Because that goes all the way back to my drinking and using. It's like, I didn't think about this when I was drunk, basically, but looking back during the process afterwards, I realized I always loved to be around people who were more. They seemed more problematic with their drinking than me. Of
course.
I always wanted people, I didn't, I'm very uncomfortable around people who just like drink and then have a drink or two and stop. Those people, I'd rule those out people. But I loved, and I always remember, just an old friend of mine used to say, I'm an ugly man. And he said, so whenever I walk into a room, I find the ugliest man I can find in there and I go stand next to him. And just talking about just having the comparison. And that's the way I did drinking. I always wanted people around me that I could, because it wasn't just because I didn't think other people were seeing it. I was delusional that the other people knew what I was doing, but it was for me protecting myself. I'm not as bad as that guy. I as a drunk, I used to go down to the Nashville, Tennessee Stockyard Lounge or whatever it was called, and big place with music and all this other stuff. I would be drunk handing out my business cards to people who I thought may have a problem drinking. I did it.
You got to meet the people where they're at.
we call it research, right? It's like, but no, that's you can't argue that that's not just totally delusional.
Right.
Absolutely.
Well, because you're talking about sort of step 6 and sort of looking under the hood and, what's making that sound, right?
Yeah.
Yep. To a certain degree, treating my addiction as a pathology instead of a sort of positive psychology approach, I'm going to be inclined, as I see where I'm falling short, where I feel guilty about, not meeting the needs of people I care about. There's a tendency to need relief, and that instant purifying relief of, because when I'm pointing the finger at someone else's evil, this is a self-righteous cause, and it gives me that immediate relief from it, as opposed to not being too negative about myself, but shining the light instead of fighting the darkness. Fighting the darkness, you can never win. but I can always just focus on, emphasizing what I'm doing right. Right.
Right.
Like in raising kids, catch kids doing things right.
Mm-hmm.
And they're going to respond to that, or responsees.
Well, right. It's a bottomless pit. I mean, when you get into the criticizing, judging mode, there's just never, I'm finding, and I think I've just been giving into it less. I'm noticing these last couple months, because I can sense the diminishing returns of it, and how, and like you said,
that's
the ratio
so important to know. It does. One of the, I'm sorry to interrupt, but that just reminded me of something, Patrick, that absolutely, because I remember getting to a place in a role play in a group one time when someone was playing my role playing that should monster, and me saying all these things. Of course, I wrote the script for the should monster. He's saying all these things to me, and I remember being exhausted and turning to my good friend Philip, who was doing the role play, but at that moment he was my should monster. And I remember in my exhaustion, and I guess the positive use of exhaustion, by the way, is I saying to him, I don't care if every goddamn thing you're saying about me is true. I may be the lowest motherfucker on the planet, but you are not helping. And that's what you just said. You're not. And I felt a relief. I could feel it in my body when I say it, when I just redo it. It's like, I had a lot of ways to go to where I needed to dismantle all these lies that were being told to me. But at that moment, I got something off of me because I was able to say what you're saying is like, this is not useful to me. Not helpful at all.
And what was helpful was what Allen was talking about, just being self-aware, seeing in doing this review of what's making noise under the hood, just writing it down, that sort of mindful approach to, why am I distracting myself with righteous indignation?
Right.
It's productive am I overcompensating for? Right.
Yeah, it's productive self-criticism. It's like that's one of the things Alan and I have been talking about a lot, is that we were talking about how just the term self-criticism has become lost, absorbed into this idea where it's equated almost immediately in sometimes some recovery circles as bad, as always bad, as and what we're doing is this is where my English major comes in. It's like, this is where we need some semantics. We need to define some terms, and for us, one of the things we've been talking about is we need to make a very distinct difference between practical and useful self-criticism and self-condemnation. It's like we talk about, guilt is about something you've done that you can maybe correct or at least acknowledge, and shame is about who you are. But it's like, but yeah, when Allen describes that's the use of practical self-criticism, where you're actually in there working on things. You got the hood up, like you said, Joe, and now we're actually making some progress, making some changes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and let's add another dimension to this thing in terms of what we're discussing here. See, what we're saying, and this goes back to what you said, Tom, is that anger isn't always, quote, a bad thing, right?
Yeah.
Even if I'm aware that, look, when I look at Hitler, although I see that we may have a few things in common, I don't like what he did, and I don't like what he stands for, and I would join the service and fight against the Nazis all day long, because I don't like that. I don't like it. It pisses me off that somebody uses their power in that way. Not to say that I haven't used my power wrong at times in my life, I have. But this doesn't mean, even though I have it, it doesn't mean I can't take a stand about it. See, and that's very important, that we don't use self-awareness to erase ourselves. See, we get to this point where, we think we got to be saints to be okay. And no, you need to be human to be okay. You got to embrace your humanity. And that means you have values that you honor. I value freedom. I mean, that's a big part of emotional sobriety and why it turns me on so much. I love our democracy. I will fight and defend our democracy, and I'll give my life for it. That's how much it means to me. That's the bottom line inside of me. So let's please don't hear anything we're saying as a way of erasing yourself. We're not asking you to erase yourself. We're asking you to become aware of yourself, become aware of how you're functioning and what's important. It doesn't mean that you're going to accept everything and that everything's okay, because some things are not okay. And it's important for you to stand for yourself. And that's the other difference, is when you get this, you learn to stand for yourself, not against anybody else.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Right.
I went to 2 back-to-back, not necessarily back-to-back, but I went to some secular AA meetings that Joe invited me to. And a particular flavor that I really liked about them is that some of the participants were very open with about their resentments and their anger about, you know, whatever things that were done a little bit differently in meetings they'd attended in the past, or you know, whatever you know, feelings happen to be bubbling up to the surface. But like the whole naming it to claim it, or naming it to tame it. I don't know which one that
Name it
is.
to claim it. Both.
Name it to claim it.
Both.
Yeah.
You got to claim it before you
Name it
tame
to
it.
tame it.
Right,
You
but-
got to claim it before you tame it.
But I mean, I've had that tendency, as Alan said, to kind of want to jump over the resentment itself, because I could sense, you know, there's some toxic aspects to it. But first step should be recognizing it and giving it some oxygen, right?
Yep.
Yeah, and I always want to repeat this, because we learn through repetition, is when we're owning our, because this is one of the things that was really difficult for me to really internalize. When we're really focused on owning our stuff, claiming our stuff, we are not saying, and this is part of what Alan's saying also, is like, we are not saying there are not problems out there. We're not saying that this is, because it's dangerous, because most of us who come into this work are already good at the self-condemnation part. So we can naturally get lost in that deal where it's like, you know, go with your talents. Oh, I can condemn myself till you know, the day doesn't exist anymore. It's like, but it's you know, inside out. It's like what Alan's saying, you can use your energy, and anger is just an energy. That said, it's a beautiful way you said that, Alan. Anger, I just finished writing, I'm working on writing, I'm about to finish up a little short thing about anger. Anger has gotten a bad reputation. I'll send it to you guys. I'd love your input.
Oh yeah, great.
But the idea is, no, that's where we go back to the stuff we talked about with Patrick. That's when you own it, when you understand anger is feelings are communications. That's all they are. They tell us something about what's going on. And so anger tells us, I don't like something a lot, or you know, maybe a little, but if you step on my toe 4 times, then I say, you know, move over, God, you know, then basically that's still anger. It's just small anger. But once you own it, then you can figure out how you can choose how you want to invest that energy and use it. And that's, we're going to have more impact on the world by doing that than we are by sitting back and judging.
Well, I was just writing a piece or reading a piece in the American Psychologist, which I get every month.
Mm-hmm.
And they had a whole section about racism,
Mhm.
and really asking psychologists to become aware of what our participation is, in either positive or negative.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And a big thing is the emphasis on this whole article was the courage to take a stand.
Mhm.
Mm-hmm.
It was very interesting, and they made such a point that taking a stand does not mean becoming violent.
Mm-hmm.
And they gave examples in terms of, first of all, what Martin Luther King did with the civil rights movement here in the United States,
Mm-hmm.
right? Teaching nonviolence and taking that off of Gandhi. And then how Cesar Chavez used the same thing to empower the migrant farm workers
Mm-hmm.
in California in terms of the thing. And he said that the most powerful changes have taken place through nonviolence.
Mm-hmm.
Now, sometimes violence is necessary. The American Revolution is an example of that. What's going on in Ukraine? I mean, I just don't see any other way. The invasion of Europe, in terms of fighting Nazi Germany, landings on Normandy and stuff like that, those were all very important. Many people gave their lives for that. But there's a range, right? And it's almost like what's what's the best response? And Bill Wilson had a great line when he talked about emotional sobriety, having relationships appropriate to that relationship. How do we discriminate or differentiate what's the best way to deal with the situation we're in? And look, sometimes you don't know. Sometimes it's a matter of trial and error. Let me try this, see what happens. Let me take in the feedback. Let me pay attention to what's going on. Am I alienating someone, or am I getting more of a connection with them? You know, because deep down inside, like I said, if the best of us is in charge, we're trying to find a way to stay connected and not get disconnected during trouble.
I did at one point bring up the idea of let's talk about emotional sobriety as it relates to the traditions instead of the steps. When I'm out of the room, I'm sure you go, oh my God, that's going to clear the room. Who wants to listen to poor guys talk about the traditions? But that's it. You go from, sort of self-healing to now, what can I do with this healed self other than be in the service of others? And you go from, the sort of 12 steps to the three-legged stool of the whole recovery community is recovery, unity, and service. So
yes,
you can't just have one leg and have the stool stand up. You need all three.
Not a good stool. Not a good stool there. Yeah.
I sat on some stools like that when I was drunk.
Yeah.
At least
the stools were fine, Alan.
It was me. You think it was me? Why did I keep falling off? What was that happening? I thought it because it had one leg.
Then we've come full circle. Alan's blaming the stools. It's like
damn stools. If they'd make these damn stools better, I wouldn't fall off so often.
They make bar stools very sturdy. I know this for a fact.
Father Martin used to say, I loved a lot of his jokes. He's great. If you've never seen Chalk Talk, it's now on video and you can watch the whole thing. I mean, on YouTube. But he used to have a saying is that, those toilet seats with the hole in this front of it, right, where it's open. He says, you know who invented that? He said a drunk who was sick and tired of having a damn toilet seat come down and hit him on the back of the neck. So he created the opening. So when it came down, it missed him. Never thought about maybe I need to address the fact that I'm drinking to the point where I'm putting my head in the toilet almost every other day, right? I mean, that's never happened.
Yeah. Maybe
harm reduction.
Yeah.
That's right.
The new toilet
harm reduction.
That's right. That's exactly what it was. That was the first form of harm reduction. First intervention. That's good, Joe. Well, this was a great discussion, you guys. I mean, such a powerful discussion to look at, to become aware of these things and to see what other possibilities exist. I mean, I love defining recovery as the discovery of new possibilities.
Yeah.
Right? And that's what our show is about. That's what you bring oftentimes, Joe. I'm a big fan of your work and what you've done. And I want to plug your book again, Beyond Belief.
Agnostic Musings for 12-Step Life.
I'll tell you, man, it's just outstanding. You did some great research on that, and your musings are wonderful.
I love musings. That's great. I love that.
Well, it means he's either playing music or thinking about.
Oh, very good, Alan. Very clever.
Right.
Well, we of course, the three of us will take a vote afterwards to be sure, but I'm going to tell you, Joe, I believe unanimously you're going to remain our favorite guest.
Yes.
For the rest of this episode.
Yeah, but that's it.
At least
that's all we have.
Fickle. Joe, we're not that fickle.
No, we live one episode.
We're probably more closer to dimension. We're going to be fixed on it. And by the way, we'll only remember that you've been the only guest that's been on our show.
That's right. It's one episode at a time, boys.
It's for us at this point in time. What happens up in Canada with the Super Bowl? You guys get into this thing, or this madness happens in America on once a year?
Yeah, we have our own Grey Cup, because we have our own Canadian Football League. But I mean, in this whole thing, there's tens of thousands of people watching, but, fans of sports are a minority. Just like when I'm crazy about a band, I think everyone's thinking about the show, everyone's going to the show. And really, you can fill up a stadium and it looks like everybody's in this together. But
Yeah.
most of the people in America aren't watching the Super Bowl. They're doing something else.
You just remind me of a conversation I had with someone. I've got to keep their name confidential, but very famous musician. And he was talking about the first time he played at a stadium that held 70,000 people. He walked out on stage and saw every seat filled. And he goes, why are they here to see me? I mean,
Right.
his self-esteem was so low, he could not wrap his head around they were there to see him.
Right.
It's kind of sad, isn't it?
Mm.
Probably not, because you probably helped him.
Yeah, well, listen, recovery helped him tremendously.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
now he can go and enjoy and see that what he's actually doing is a service. And that's the way I've kind of thought about
That's
people
beautiful.
entertaining. They are servicing us, right? They're
Right.
acting.
And they wouldn't
us
they wouldn't be
something
here if we
Like the
we wouldn't be
mechanic
there
or
if we didn't choose them.
bartender.
Yeah, yeah.
You know who I've really come to appreciate recently is the depth of Bruce Springsteen's writing and work.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, my God, he's a very deep thinking man, and really writes reflecting so much of the heartbeat of what's going on. Like his album, The Rising, after 9/11, I think is one of the all-time. I don't know if you guys have never listened to it. Put it on and listen to it. It is one of the all-time best albums I've ever written in response to an event.
Mm-hmm.
It was phenomenal.
Yes,
Sort of
absolutely.
capturing the zeitgeist of what was
Oh
going
my
on.
God, it was
for,
so powerful. Every song.
the Western world.
I mean,
yeah.
after 9/11, and I think it came out a couple months later.
Mhm.
I mean, he was so inspired to write it. I would sit and cry. I mean, it's that powerful. So, anyway, great show, man.
You bet.
All right, we'll see you next week.
Tend your life, tend your myth. Cultivate your narrative with whomever you're with. Then with glass in hand and children on one knee, bring some stories, bring your stories back to me. It ain't a crime to be a human. Never be ashamed to be yourself. Rest assured that whatever you're doing will entertain me like nobody else. So here's to us, my old friends, until it's time to drink the wine and break the bread again. With glass in hand and children on one knee, bring some stories, bring your stories back to me.